Welcome to your personalized deep dive into AWS CloudTrail. We've got a stack of AWS documentation here, and we're going to help you understand what this service can do. Whether you're a seasoned cloud pro or just starting out with AWS, you're going to want to pay attention because CloudTrail can be a game changer for how you manage security, compliance, and even costs in your cloud environment.
That's right. You can think of CloudTrail as a detective for your AWS account. It diligently logs every action and API call that happens, kind of like a detailed record of who did what, when, and where in your cloud environment.
So if someone spins up a new EC2 instance,
Yeah.
or changes security group settings, or even just accesses a file in S3, CloudTrail is taking notes.
Exactly. But what's really cool is that CloudTrail isn't just about passively recording these events, it's about making sense of them and turning them into actionable insights.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. How does it do that?
Well, for one thing, you've got CloudTrail Lake. Think of it as a data lake, specifically built for your AWS logs. With CloudTrail Lake, you can actually query your log data using SQL, which means you can ask very specific questions about what's happening in your AWS environment.
So instead of sifting through endless log files, I can just type in a query, like show me all the access denied errors for the past 3 weeks, and boom, I've got my answer.
That's it. You can even save the results of those queries to an S3 bucket for later analysis or sharing with your team.
That's incredibly powerful. So we're talking about saving a ton of time and effort and probably avoiding a lot of headaches in the process.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even better. CloudTrail can also proactively alert you to unusual activity as it happens.
Which can be a real lifesaver.
Yeah.
From a security perspective.
Okay, so CloudTrail isn't just about looking back at what happened, it's also about keeping an eye out for potential problems in real time.
I like that.
It's like having a security guard that never sleeps. Let's say your account usually has very few access denied exception errors, but suddenly you see a surge in them. CloudTrail Insights will flag that immediately.
This is like a canary in a coal mine, warning you that something might be wrong.
Precisely. And you can actually customize which types of insights you want to track. You can also enable data events for specific services, like S3, to see who's accessing your buckets, or specific files within those buckets.
That level of granular visibility sounds really helpful, especially when you're dealing with sensitive data.
It is. And the great thing about CloudTrail is that it offers different ways to interact with it. You can use the CloudTrail console, which has a user-friendly interface, or dive deeper with the AWS CLI or APIs if you're more comfortable with those tools.
So there's an entry point for everyone, regardless of their technical skills.
Exactly. And even better, you can manage CloudTrail across multiple AWS accounts. Thanks to its integration with AWS Organizations, this is especially helpful for larger organizations or teams working on different projects.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, CloudTrail is giving me deep insights into my AWS usage, helping me boost security, and potentially even helping me manage my cloud costs more effectively.
You're getting it. At its core, CloudTrail is about empowering you with knowledge. Knowledge about how your resources are being used, knowledge about potential security threats, and knowledge about how to optimize your cloud spending.
Speaking of cost, is CloudTrail itself expensive to use?
That's a great question. There are costs associated, but you have options. CloudTrail Lake, for instance, offers flexible pricing plans, and you can choose between 1-year extendable retention or 7-year retention, depending on how long you need to keep your log data.
So I can tailor my retention period to my specific needs and budget.
Right. And remember, CloudTrail isn't just some static archive. Those log files are stored in an S3 bucket, so you can download them directly if you need to. For more advanced analysis, there's also the CloudTrail Processing Library, which gives you more power to dig deep into your logs and extract meaningful information.
That's a good point. So it's not just about having the data, it's about being able to do something with it.
Exactly. Now, before we dive deeper into some of the more technical aspects of CloudTrail, let's take a step back and recap what we've covered so far.
Sounds good. A little recap never hurts.
So we've got event history, which gives us a 90-day window into our account activity. It's important to remember, though, that event history is limited to management events. You can't exclude events for certain services, like AWS KMS or the Amazon RDS Data API.
Right, so there are some limitations with the free tier of event history.
Yeah.
But if we need longer retention or more comprehensive event logging, we can upgrade to CloudTrail Lake.
Precisely. CloudTrail Lake is where you can really unlock the power of querying and analyzing your logs with SQL. And then we have CloudTrail Insights, which is constantly on the lookout for unusual behavior that might indicate a security threat or an operational issue.
And let's not forget the integrations with other services, like AWS organizations and Security Lake. These integrations seem to play a key role in managing CloudTrail effectively across multiple accounts and enhancing our overall security posture.
You got it. Taken together. These features make CloudTrail a comprehensive suite of tools for managing your cloud environment. But I know what you're thinking. This sounds like it could generate a lot of data. How do we even begin to make sense of it all?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's easy to get overwhelmed with data, especially in a complex cloud environment.
Well, CloudTrail has got you covered there too. Enter CloudTrail Lake dashboards. These dashboards offer a visual way to understand the events in your event data store.
So it's like a visual summary of all those logs, showing you the key trends and patterns without having to write complex queries.
Exactly. Each dashboard has multiple widgets, and each one represents a SQL query, so you can customize what information you see at a glance.
Okay, so no more drowning in a sea of data. That's a relief. But hold on. If these dashboards are running SQL queries, doesn't that mean there are costs involved?
You're sharp. Yes, running queries does incur charges based on how much data is scanned. But here's a tip. You can reduce those costs by filtering your dashboard data to a narrower time range.
So being mindful of the time range can help keep those costs under control. Now, you mentioned that our log files are stored in an S3 bucket. How do we actually access them?
It's actually quite simple. You can view and download your log files directly from the S3 bucket using the CloudTrail console. It's a straightforward process, even if you're not comfortable using the command line or APIs.
So even if I'm not a coding expert, I can still easily get to the raw data.
Absolutely. The CloudTrail console is designed to be accessible to users of all technical levels. And if you are comfortable with coding, the CloudTrail processing library gives you those advanced options for analysis.
Now I'm curious, does CloudTrail help us meet any specific compliance requirements?
This is where CloudTrail really shines. It plays a key role in compliance validation with services like Amazon Guard Duty and AWS Audit Manager. So yes, it can definitely help you tick those compliance boxes, which is a huge relief for anyone dealing with regulations.
Okay, that's good to know. And what about security? Is CloudTrail designed with resilience in mind?
Absolutely. It features robust infrastructure security and measures to prevent what's called cross-service confused deputy prevention. Essentially, this means that CloudTrail has safeguards in place to prevent unauthorized access to your resources.
So it sounds like AWS had taken security seriously when designing CloudTrail.
Definitely. AWS uses things like transport layer security, TLS, to ensure secure communication. But it's worth reminding everyone that security is a shared responsibility. AWS takes care of securing the infrastructure, but you're responsible for configuring CloudTrail securely and managing your own access keys and credentials responsibly.
So strong passwords and multi-factor authentication are still essential best practices.
Absolutely. Never underestimate the importance of good security hygiene. Now, before we move on, let's talk about those data events we mentioned earlier. Remember, data events capture the actions taken on your resources within specific AWS services.
So if I enable data events for S3, I'll see every time someone accesses my buckets or the objects within them.
Exactly. It's like having a granular log of what's happening with your data. But keep in mind that you need to configure which resource types you want to track for data events, because they're not all logged by default.
Okay, so we need to be intentional about what we choose to log. Now, with all these logging options, are there any limits to how much we can track?
There are a few resource quotas to keep in mind. For example, you can have a maximum of 5 trails per AWS region and 10 event data stores per region.
Those limits seem pretty reasonable, though.
Yes, the quotas are designed to accommodate most use cases. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive into CloudTrail, let's talk about managing the costs associated with CloudTrail Lake. We already discussed that queries can incur charges.
Right, and we talked about filtering the data we ingest and query as a strategy for minimizing the amount of data scanned and keeping those costs down. But are there any other strategies for managing costs?
One of the best ways to manage costs is to choose the right pricing plan for your event data store. We talked about 1-year extendable retention and 7-year retention options earlier. Selecting the plan that aligns with your data retention needs can make a big difference.
So if I don't need to keep my logs for 7 years, I can choose the 1-year plan and save some money.
Exactly. And AWS offers tools like Cost Explorer, where you can track your CloudTrail usage and spending in detail. You can even break down the costs by usage types, like data events recorded, network events recorded, and ingestion bytes.
So I have the visibility and tools to monitor those costs closely. That's reassuring. This has been a lot of information to take in. But I'm starting to get a good grasp of what CloudTrail is all about and why it's such a valuable service.
That's great to hear. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore even more advanced features and use cases for CloudTrail. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into AWS CloudTrail.
It's great to be back. In part one, we covered a lot of ground, from the basics of event logging to the power of CloudTrail Lake and CloudTrail Insights.
We talked about how CloudTrail can help us gain visibility into our AWS environment, boost security, and even manage costs.
Right. Now let's shift our focus to something that's particularly important if you're working with sensitive data: log file integrity validation.
Okay, that sounds serious. What exactly is log file integrity validation?
Think of it this way. You've got these detailed logs of activity in your AWS account, which is great for security and compliance. But what if someone tampered with those logs? That could be a big problem.
Yeah, I can see how that would undermine the whole purpose of having logs in the first place.
Exactly. So CloudTrail provides a mechanism to cryptographically validate the integrity of your log files, essentially guaranteeing that they haven't been altered. It's like having a tamper-proof seal on your logs.
Okay, so it's like a way to prove that the logs are authentic
Mhm.
and haven't been messed with. How does that work in practice?
CloudTrail generates something called digest files alongside your regular log files. These digest files contain cryptographic hashes of the log files. You can think of a hash as a unique fingerprint for each file.
I'm with you so far. So we've got these fingerprint files that basically prove the integrity of the logs. What do we do with them?
You can then use the AWS CLI, or the CloudTrail API, to run a validation process. This process compares the fingerprints in the digest files to the actual fingerprints of the log files.
So if even a single bit in a log file has been changed, the validation process will detect a mismatch.
Exactly. It's a really powerful way to ensure the trustworthiness of your logs, especially if you're using them for compliance or auditing purposes.
That makes sense. Now, I know you mentioned the CLI and the API. Can you quickly remind me what those are?
Sure. CLI stands for Command Line Interface. It's a text-based way to interact with AWS services. The API, or Application Programming Interface, is a way for different software systems to talk to each other. Both the CLI and the API offer more programmatic control over CloudTrail than the console, but they do require some technical expertise to use effectively.
So if I'm comfortable with the command line or writing code, I can use those methods. But if I prefer a more visual point-and-click approach, I can stick with the CloudTrail console.
Exactly. The console is a great starting point for most users. It lets you create and manage trails, configure event logging, view event history, access log files in S3, and a lot more.
So the console is our one-stop shop for interacting with CloudTrail.
You got it. And it's designed to be pretty intuitive, even if you're new to AWS. Speaking of the console, let's talk about CloudTrail Insights events. Remember, these are the events that alert you to unusual activity in your account.
Yeah, we touched on those in part one. They sound like a really valuable feature. For security and troubleshooting, can you give us a bit more detail on the types of insights events that CloudTrail can generate?
Sure. There are two main types: API call rate insights and API error rate insights, as you might guess. These events are triggered when CloudTrail detects a sudden spike in API call volume or a surge in errors for a specific API.
So if I normally make a few API calls per hour to a particular service, and suddenly that number jumps to hundreds or thousands, CloudTrail will flag that as suspicious.
Precisely. And it's not just about the volume of calls. CloudTrail is also looking for unusual patterns in the types of API calls being made. For example, if you see a bunch of delete security group calls coming from an unfamiliar IP address, that's a pretty good indication that something fishy is going on.
That's a great example. So it's not just a simple threshold-based system. CloudTrail is actually analyzing the context of those API calls.
That's right. And the insights events don't just tell you that something unusual is happening. They actually include a lot of detail, like the event source, event name, insight type, and what are called attribution fields.
Attribution fields. Those sound interesting.
They are. Attribution fields can tell you the top user identities, user agents, and error codes associated with the unusual activity.
Yeah.
So you can really drill down and see who's involved, what they're doing, and what specific errors are occurring.
That level of detail could be really helpful in investigating a security incident or troubleshooting a tricky problem.
It's incredibly valuable. Now let's talk about how CloudTrail can be used to monitor AWS Management Console sign-in events.
Okay, so we're talking about being able to see who's logging into the console, when they're logging in, and from where they're logging in.
Exactly. CloudTrail logs these events, giving you details like the user identity, the event time, the source IP address, and even the user agent, which tells you what browser or operating system they were using.
So if someone's logging in from a country I've never done business in before, or using a really old, potentially insecure web browser, CloudTrail will capture that information.
That's right. And that kind of information can be really helpful in detecting unauthorized access attempts and strengthening your overall security posture.
This is all starting to paint a picture of CloudTrail as a really comprehensive security tool.
And it is. And we're not even done yet. All of this information is available through CloudTrail Lake or by accessing the log files directly. So depending on your preferences and your technical comfort level, you've got options for how you want to consume and analyze this data.
That's great. Now I want to shift gears for a bit and talk about something that's often overlooked when we talk about security and compliance. Data consistency.
Data consistency. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's all well and good to have these detailed logs, but what if the data itself is inconsistent? For example, what if one part of my application sees one version of a data record and another part of my application sees a different version? That could lead to all sorts of problems.
You're absolutely right. Data consistency is critical, especially when you're dealing with distributed systems, like the ones we have in the cloud. Fortunately, AWS provides guidance and tools to help you manage data consistency across its various services.
So I don't have to figure this all out on my own?
Not at all. Take Amazon S3, for example. AWS has documented the S3 data consistency model. It explains exactly how updates to objects are propagated and when you can expect those changes to be visible. Similar guidance is available for other services, like Amazon Redshift.
Okay, so there's clear documentation on how these services handle data consistency. That's reassuring.
It is. Understanding these consistency models is key to avoiding unexpected behavior and ensuring that your applications are reliable.
This is really helpful information. Now, you mentioned earlier that CloudTrail can be used with Amazon CloudWatch logs. Can you tell me more about how those two services work together?
They're a powerful combination. You can configure your CloudTrail trails to send events directly to CloudWatch logs. This lets you monitor those events in real time and receive alerts for specific events that you're interested in.
So it's like I'm creating a live feed of CloudTrail events into CloudWatch logs.
Exactly. And CloudWatch logs has some awesome features. For monitoring, alerting, and analysis, you can create metric filters to track specific event patterns, set up alarms to notify you of critical events, and even visualize your data with dashboards.
So we're talking about going beyond basic logging and creating a really proactive monitoring system.
Precisely. This can be a game changer for detecting security threats early on, troubleshooting issues quickly, and ensuring the overall health of your AWS environment.
That's awesome. We also talked about those potentially huge log files. If I'm dealing with a high volume of events, are there any special tools or techniques for managing those files?
You're right. Those files can get big, especially for busy accounts. That's where the CloudTrail processing library comes in. It's specifically designed to help you process large volumes of CloudTrail logs efficiently.
Can you remind me what that library is all about?
It's a Java library that gives you a framework for parsing, analyzing, and taking action on CloudTrail events. It does a lot of the heavy lifting, allowing you to focus on the specific logic you need for your use case.
So instead of writing a bunch of custom code to parse through those log files, I can use this library to simplify things.
Exactly. It's like having a specialized toolkit for working with CloudTrail data. Let's say you want to process CloudTrail logs to figure out all the S3 buckets that were created in the last week. The CloudTrail processing library can help you parse those logs, extract the relevant events, and then take action based on that information.
So I could potentially automate tasks based on what I find in those logs.
Exactly. It's a great tool for anyone who needs to work with CloudTrail data at scale. And it's open source, so you can customize it to meet your specific needs.
That's really cool. Okay, before we wrap up part 2 of our deep dive, I want to make sure we talk about something that's absolutely crucial. For any organization using CloudTrail, managing access and permissions.
You're right. Controlling who has access to CloudTrail, its configurations, and especially the sensitive data it logs is incredibly important.
But how do we manage access and permissions effectively?
AWS Identity and Access Management, or IAM, is your best friend here. You can use IAM policies to define fine-grained permissions for CloudTrail. You can control who can create trails, update configurations, view event history, and even access log files.
It's about using IAM to make sure the right people have the right level of access. No more, no less.
That's it. For example, you might create an IAM policy that allows your security team to view all CloudTrail events, but only allows developers to see events related to the applications they're working on.
So it's all about being granular and intentional with those permissions. This makes a lot of sense. Now, are there any security best practices we should keep in mind when we're configuring CloudTrail?
One of the best things you can do is to enable multi-factor authentication, or MFA, for all IAM users who have access to CloudTrail.
So even if someone steals a password, they still can't get into CloudTrail without that second factor of authentication.
Exactly. MFA adds that extra layer of security that can make a huge difference. It's one of the most effective ways to protect your AWS account and the sensitive data it contains. Another best practice is to regularly review your CloudTrail configurations and your IAM policies.
So it's not just a set it and forget it kind of thing.
No. Security is an ongoing process. You want to make sure that your configurations are still appropriate and that your policies are still aligned with your security needs.
Good advice. It seems like we've covered just about everything there is to know about CloudTrail.
Not quite. In the final part of our CloudTrail deep dive, we'll explore some of the advanced features that can take your usage to the next level. We'll see you then.
Welcome back to the final part of our AWS CloudTrail deep dive.
Glad to be here. In parts 1 and 2, we explored the core features, security aspects, and even some cost management strategies for CloudTrail.
We talked about how it acts as a detective, recording events and helping us analyze what's happening in our AWS environment.
Right. Now, let's shift gears and explore some of the advanced features and use cases that can really unlock the power of CloudTrail.
Sounds good. I'm ready to go deeper.
Great. Let's start with something called CloudTrail Lake integrations. These integrations allow you to bring events from sources outside of AWS directly into CloudTrail Lake. Think of it as breaking down those data silos and creating a central hub for all your logs.
So we're not just limited to AWS events anymore. We can bring in logs from our on-premises servers, applications running in other clouds, or even our IoT devices.
Exactly. Imagine the possibilities. You could have logs from your entire IT landscape, all flowing into CloudTrail Lake, ready for analysis. It gives you a unified view of your environment.
Okay, that's a game changer, especially for organizations running hybrid or multi-cloud environments. How do these integrations actually work?
It involves setting up a CloudTrail Lake channel, which acts as a pipeline for ingesting those external events. You then use the CloudTrail put-out-at-events API to send data to this channel.
So it's a combination of a dedicated channel and an API for sending data. What kind of flexibility do we have in terms of data formats? Can we customize what we send?
Absolutely. CloudTrail Lake integrations support a flexible event schema that can accommodate a wide range of data types. You can include standard fields like event ID, event time, source IP address, user identity, and even custom fields that are specific to your needs.
So if I have a custom application that generates logs with specific fields, I can include those in the data I send to CloudTrail Lake.
That's right. You have a lot of control over the data you ingest. And once the data is in CloudTrail Lake, you can leverage all the familiar querying and analysis tools to gain insights from that data. You can run SQL queries, create visualizations, and build dashboards.
It sounds like a really powerful way to gain a holistic view of our entire IT environment. This could be incredibly valuable for security monitoring, compliance reporting, even business intelligence.
You're catching on. Now let's move on to another exciting feature called Lake Query Federation. This allows you to query your CloudTrail Lake data directly using Amazon Athena.
Okay, I'm familiar with Athena. It's that interactive query service that lets us analyze data in S3 using SQL, right?
Exactly. When you enable Lake Query Federation, CloudTrail creates a connection between your event data store and the AWS Glue data catalog. This makes your CloudTrail Lake data available to Athena, allowing you to run SQL queries against it without having to move the data or do any complex transformations.
So it's all about making my data easily accessible for analysis. I like that. And because Athena is a serverless service, I only pay for the queries I run, making it a cost-effective solution.
You got it. It's all about efficiency and flexibility. Now I want to revisit something we discussed earlier. Managing access to CloudTrail for organizations with multiple AWS accounts.
Right, we talked about using IAM policies to define permissions. But how does that scale when we have multiple accounts? It could get pretty complex, managing policies for each individual account.
That's where AWS Organizations comes in. It lets you centrally manage access and permissions across all your AWS accounts. You can establish policies at the organization level that cascade down to all the accounts within your organization.
Well, I can create a policy once at the organization level, and it will automatically apply to all my accounts. That's much simpler than managing policies for each individual account.
Precisely. For instance, you can create a policy that only allows certain users within your organization to create or modify CloudTrail trails. This helps enforce consistency and makes it much easier to manage your overall security posture across your entire organization.
That's a huge time saver and helps ensure that our security policies are applied consistently. Okay, before we wrap up our deep dive, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, compliance. Can you give us some specific examples of how organizations can use CloudTrail to meet their compliance obligations?
Sure. CloudTrail is often a key component of compliance audits. It can help organizations prove they are meeting regulatory requirements. For example, the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, or PCI DSS, mandates that organizations track and monitor access to cardholder data. CloudTrail can help you meet this requirement by logging all the activities related to your payment systems, showing exactly who accessed what data and when.
So we can demonstrate to auditors that we're following the rules.
Yeah.
And protecting sensitive cardholder data.
Exactly. And it's not just PCI DSS. Other regulations like IPA,
Yeah.
which governs healthcare data, and GDPR, the European Union's data privacy law, have similar requirements for logging and auditing. CloudTrail can be a lifesaver when it comes to demonstrating compliance with these regulations.
That's incredibly valuable for organizations in those industries. It sounds like CloudTrail is more than just a logging service. It's a critical tool for maintaining security, demonstrating compliance, and gaining insights into our AWS environment.
That's a great way to put it. CloudTrail gives you that much-needed visibility into your AWS environment. It's like having a detailed audit trail of every action taken.
And with all these advanced features we've discussed, from CloudTrail lake integrations to lake query federation, it's clear that CloudTrail is an evolving service that keeps getting more powerful.
Absolutely. As AWS continues to innovate, we can expect even more exciting features and capabilities to be added to CloudTrail in the future.
Well, this has been an incredibly informative deep dive into AWS CloudTrail. I feel like I've learned so much, and I'm sure our listeners have too.
Me too. It's been a pleasure sharing this information with you and our listeners.
Before we sign off, what's the one key takeaway you'd want our listeners to remember about CloudTrail?
CloudTrail is more than just a logging service. It's a powerful tool that can help you gain visibility into your AWS environment, strengthen your security posture, demonstrate compliance, and ultimately gain more control over your cloud journey.
That's great advice. Don't just set it and forget it. Explore its features, tailor it to your needs, and unlock the valuable insights it holds. Thanks for joining us for this CloudTrail deep dive. Until next time, happy clouding.